In December 1866, during Red Cloud's War, a conflict sparked by U.S. expansion into the Powder River Country, a coalition of Lakota, Cheyenne, and Arapaho warriors confronted the U.S. Army in a bold stand to defend their lands and way of life. Crazy Horse and 10 of his warriors lured Captain William Fetterman's patrol at Fort Phil Kearny into a deadly trap. The Fetterman Battle, one of the most decisive battles of the war, saw 81 U.S. soldiers fall in a matter of minutes. It was a retaliation by the natives for trespassing on treaty lands in earlier Army attacks such as the Sand Creek Massacre in 1864. The battle was fought near Fort Phil Kearny. The fort sat on land that was included in the Fort Laramie Treaty of 1851. This treaty began the process of limiting how much land Native Americans would have in the Great Plains. Signed by the United States and the Northern Plains Native tribes, the treaty set aside parts of Nebraska, South Dakota, Montana, and Wyoming as exclusively Native land. It stated that Plains natives would stop intertribal fighting, define boundaries of each tribe, and to pay compensation to the U.S. government if their tribe members broke these rules. The U.S. Army was permitted to build roads, military, and other posts within the treaty lands. Other settlers were forbidden. In return, the U.S. government stated they would protect Plain natives from any white Americans, and that the U.S. government will provide $50,000 annually for 10 years, and possibly another 5 years of provisions. However, there were several problems in creating the agreement. Firstly, the U.S. government found it difficult to get an individual from each tribe to effectively represent their whole tribe. Secondly, some tribes did not attend the meetings. Thirdly, it was difficult to set clear territorial boundaries for each native tribe. Native society did not set fixed boundaries on land, as they usually traveled extensively to hunt buffalo and gather food. Also, the treaty was written in English, and many of the native representatives did not fully understand what they had agreed to. Tensions in the region started rising in 1863. Seeking a quicker path, John Bozeman blazed the Bozeman Trail, a new route for immigrants traveling to the Montana goldfields. The 680-mile-long Bozeman Trail was of questionable legality since it passed directly through land that the government had promised to the Arapaho, Cheyenne, Lakota, and Crow in the Fort Laramie Treaty of 1851. These were the richest hunting grounds left to the tribes. Deer, elk, and mountain sheep were plentiful. Wagon trains disrupted the hunting, and draft animals and livestock ate up great swaths of grassland. In order to drive out settlers, the natives started attacking them. When Colorado militiamen massacred and mutilated about 230 Cheyenne and Arapaho men, women, and children during the Sand Creek Massacre of 1864, Native Americans began to take revenge by attacking whites all across the plains, including the emigrants traveling the Bozeman Trail. In 1865, the Little Arkansas Treaty was signed by chiefs of various Plains tribes. The treaty, which tried to make peace, was unsuccessful, as hostilities continued, and many other chiefs of these tribes didn't even sign it. In 1866, the government called upon thousands of Lakota to meet at Fort Laramie for a treaty that would allow settlers safe passage on the Bozeman Trail. Many Native chiefs were present, including Red Cloud. At the same time, Colonel Henry B. Carrington arrived at the site. His orders were to protect emigrants traveling west along the Bozeman Trail. Carrington had 700 soldiers and 300 civilians. Seeing Carrington's command with many soldiers angered Lakota Chief Red Cloud. He stated that the army is here to take the land of the natives and refused to sign the treaty. He then left, and other chiefs and warriors followed him. The U.S. government responded by building a series of forts along the Bozeman Trail. The largest and most important of these was Fort Phil Kearny, erected the same year in north-central Wyoming under Carrington's command. Carrington, 400 soldiers, and most civilians were stationed in Fort Phil Kearny. During a journey from Fort Phil Kearny, Carrington had met Lakota Chief Standing Elk. Although his people sought peace, Standing Elk told Carrington there were Lakota bands in the Powder River Country that had not consented to the treaty agreements signed at Fort Laramie back in 1851. He also informed Carrington that the Cheyenne and Arapaho supported the Lakota. That year, the discomfort of the natives towards the army and emigrants peaked. Red Cloud was determined to face any odds rather than bow down. In his speech, he said,
"Hear ye, Dakotas. When the Great Father at Washington sent us his chief soldier to ask for a path through our hunting grounds, a way for his iron road to the mountains and the western sea, We were told that they wished merely to pass through our country, not to tarry among us, but to seek for gold in the far west. Our old chiefs thought to show their friendship and goodwill when they allowed this dangerous snake in our midst. They promised to protect the wayfarers. Yet before the ashes of the council fire are cold, the Great Father is building his forts among us. You have heard the sound of the white soldier's axe upon the Little Piney. His presence here is an insult and a threat. It is an insult to the spirits of our ancestors. Are we then to give up their sacred graves to be plowed for corn? Dakotas, I am for war.
Many warriors answered his call. Lakota warriors with their Cheyenne and Arapaho allies in the Powder River country launched what became known as Red Cloud's War. Under the leadership of Red Cloud and Crazy Horse, they began to focus their attacks on Fort Phil Kearny, constantly harassing the soldiers and raiding their wood and supply parties. The fort's need for fresh timber was its weakness. The closest suitable woodland was about 4 miles west of the fort. Wagons would often be ambushed by the natives, even when heavily escorted. From July over the next few months, Carrington reported 51 skirmishes in which Red Cloud's men probed the fort's defenses. Between August and mid-December 1866, the natives killed more than 70 soldiers and civilians around Fort Phil Kearny. Raiding parties rode off with approximately 700 government horses, mules, and cattle. Meanwhile, in November, a cavalry company of 63 men arrived to reinforce the post. The cavalry company was led by Lieutenant Horatio S. Bingham. He was accompanied by infantry captains William J. Fetterman and James W. Powell. On December 6, 1866, the natives attacked a wagon train near the fort. A relief party was sent, with Fetterman leading 40 men and Carrington, who intended to close in behind the natives with 25 men. Crazy Horse discovered that he could lead a small detachment of soldiers into an ambush by fleeing as they were defenseless. Chasing them were Carrington and his soldiers. The native small party were suddenly joined by other warriors, numbering a total of 100. They turned around and attacked, surrounding Carrington. The close combat fight lasted several minutes. Under heavy pressure, the natives routed the soldiers, killing 3 of them. Carrington's men were saved by Fetterman. The natives retreated, not knowing how many soldiers were following Fetterman. It's not known if and how many casualties the natives had. Struck by the impulsiveness of the soldiers, Crazy Horse and Red Cloud reasoned that perhaps a much larger force could be lured into a similar deadly trap. On the other hand, Carrington became more cautious. He decided to halt the woodcutting expeditions. The wood train ordered to go out on December 21st was to be the last until spring. Just before the big battle, Red Cloud called for the Lakota's most powerful two-spirit person, who was believed to have special powers, to give advice from the hill overlooking the proposed ambush site. He rode on his pony in a crazed manner 4 times between the warriors gathered on the hill and Lodge Trail Ridge, each time gathering more soldiers into his hands. When he returned to Red Cloud the 4th time, he had 100 bluecoat soldiers in his hands, too many to hold. The Lakota saw this as good medicine that won the battle, and thereafter called it the Battle of the 100 in the Hands. On the morning of December 21st, as 1,000 Lakota, Cheyenne, and Arapaho warriors waited eagerly, a wagon train with 30 soldiers and 65 armed civilian teamsters escorting 35 wagons departed. An hour later, at 10 a.m., the natives attacked the train. Inside Fort Phil Kearny, Captain Powell prepared to lead a relief force. Fetterman went to Carrington and demanded command of the expedition. Lieutenant George W. Grummond and Captain Brown joined Fetterman. Carrington consented to Fetterman's demand, placing him in command of 80 men in total, 49 infantrymen, 27 cavalry, and 2 civilians. Fetterman led the infantry on foot and Grummond led the cavalry. Carrington's orders were to support the wood train, relieve it, and report back to him. He ordered not to engage or pursue the natives at Fetterman's expense. Under no circumstances, pursue over Lodge Trail Ridge. Fetterman left the fort about 11:15 a.m. Almost as soon as Fetterman left the fort, the natives had disengaged and started moving away, and the wagons resumed their trip to the timbering site. As no medical officers accompanied the wood train or Fetterman's patrol, Carrington summoned C.M. Hines, an assistant surgeon under contract to the U.S. Army. The colonel ordered Hines to accompany the wagon train and to treat any casualties he found. Moreover, he was to catch up with Fetterman if possible. With the wood train no longer under attack, Fetterman focused on the 10 mounted warriors who taunted the soldiers. They were led by Crazy Horse. Fetterman followed them past the eastern slopes of the hills. The warriors continued slowly toward Lodge Trail Ridge. Crazy Horse and his riders slowly disappeared beyond the ridge. Grummond and the cavalry rode ahead of the infantry. They opened fire, bringing down a few native riders. The decoys crossed the frozen ford of Penno Creek. They formed two groups and rode away from each other, but then turned and crossed their paths. That was the signal for the 1,000 hidden natives to attack. The warriors rose up from hidden positions in the grass and brush and let loose a barrage of arrows. A few natives rode headlong among the soldiers and were shot dead. The two civilians, Wheatley and Fisher, dismounted and a few cavalrymen joined them. They took cover behind large rocks and a few dead ponies, while the rest of the cavalry started to retreat south, reaching a ridge topped with rocks and boulders. Grummond was shot and killed in the retreat. Those on the north fought a few minutes and then were killed. Native warriors fighting mostly on foot in the snowy, icy terrain clashed with them and killed them in bunches. A handful of cavalrymen broke through the encircling warriors and made it to where Fetterman was attempting to rally his infantry among a pile of boulders. A group of mostly Lakota swept up the east slope of the ridge to attack Fetterman, while the warriors also moved in, surrounding the soldiers. Hand-to-hand fighting ensued. Within 20 minutes, the natives had slain the soldiers. Many of the men were slain by war clubs and lances in the final moments of the fight. Captain Brown shot himself while Fetterman died of slash wounds to his chest and throat. Lakota Chief American Horse knocked Fetterman down and killed him with a knife. Atop their ridge, the last of Grummond's cavalrymen struggled across the icy surface until they found good cover amid a cluster of boulders. To the south, they saw a sea of warriors. They were cut out from the fort, their horses driven away. It was a matter of minutes until the last soldier was cut down. The battle lasted about 40 minutes. Fetterman's whole command lay dead, 81 men. It is estimated that native casualties were between 13 and 60. Only half a dozen soldiers bore evidence of gunshot wounds. Nearly all of the Lakota, Cheyenne, and Arapaho in the battle were armed with traditional weapons such as bows, lances, tomahawks, and clubs. The victorious warriors slashed and mutilated the dead. Every soldier except one. The body of bugler Adolph Metzger was left untouched after his death. Near his lifeless body was his bugle. Crumpled and battered, the bugle obviously served Metzger as a war club in his last moments. Metzger's corpse was found covered with a Lakota buffalo robe, left behind as a mark of respect for his courage. Back at Fort Phil Kearny, it was just before noon when the garrison heard gunfire. Hines soon returned with chilling news. He had been able to ride only as far as a hill some distance from the fort. He hurried back when he saw only a vast array of native warriors and no trace of Fetterman's men. Carrington ordered 75 men under Captain Tenador Ten Eyck to relieve the embattled detachment. Moments after Ten Eyck left the fort, the colonel dispatched 40 more men to join them. About 3 miles from the fort, Ten Eyck halted on high ground to the right of the road. From the heights, Ten Eyck's troopers could see only the vast native force, celebrating their victory. The warriors taunted the soldiers, bidding them to come on down and fight. Neither the natives nor the army moved to attack, and the warriors moved to the west. There would be no more fighting that day. The Fetterman Battle occurred during the opening months of Red Cloud's War. It continued until 1868. Subscribe if you liked the video. I'm going to cover other battles from this war in the future.